I've got some booms for you today based on a story that came out of Britain the other day. Turns out that the government over there has signed a 12-month contract with a company called Entrust, and they're going to provide the COVID-19 digital passport technology for your smartphone. This has caused a lot of uproar, of course, because they thought they were still debating this issue. Meanwhile, they come to find out that the government has already signed a contract. Let's learn a little bit more about that. Yesterday, the NHS app was upgraded to allow it to be used as a COVID vaccine passport domestically in England with a message that read, quote, "You may need to show your NHS COVID pass at places that have chosen to use the service." Documents published Wednesday show that Entrust, a US-based IT firm, is set to receive almost £840,000 from the government to help produce digital COVID certificates via the NHS app. The contract is set to last until July next year, but it will likely be renewed until mid-2023, with pricing for a 2-year contract already detailed in official documents. Entrust was awarded $250,000 earlier this year in a separate government agreement for its work on the UK vaccine passport scheme. The contract drew staunch criticism from MPs and civil liberties groups, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, they've already sent out the message. You may need to show your NHS COVID pass at places that have chosen to use the service. And this is how it's going to go, right? Different private companies or venues, restaurants, hotels, transportation services, they're all going to be able to choose whether to use it or not. So, the state's not doing it. It's just private companies, and private companies can do whatever they want. Isn't that right? Well, we're going to go through the history of Entrust, the company that got the contract, and we're going to see that yes, indeed, private companies can do whatever they want. You're not going to believe where Entrust leads us to. So what does Entrust do exactly? Entrust develops public key infrastructure, PKI, and secure socket layer, SSL technology for encrypting and transmitting documents in electronic digital format via the internet. Who are some of its clients? Well, the Canadian federal government, including the Department of National Defense, more than 2,000 organizations in 60 countries, and this is as of 2009. It also handles the financial companies such as JP Morgan, Citibank, and RBC. But that's not all. Here's a notice right from Entrust in 2003 where they say that they have customers which include the U.S. Department of State, Department of Energy, Department of Justice, the State of Illinois, NASA, JP Morgan Chase, U.S. Coast Guard, the UK and U.S. Postal Services, Lloyds Bank, Merrill Lynch, the Government of Canada, and many more. So they've got their tentacles deep, deep, deep within the most secure transactions of all of those places I just listed. And keep in mind, that list, the one was from 2003, the other one was from 2009. How much has it grown since then? Well, who owns this company? Entrust. Well, Entrust was actually a part of another company earlier called DataCard, and DataCard is responsible for creating, stuff like bank cards and credit cards and passports and gift cards. Anything that can be printed on a card, DataCard made. So DataCard was originally the creation of a guy called Willis Drake in 1969, but in 1987, a family called the Quants acquired the company DataCard. Then they took it private, and later, in 2013, that's when they bought Entrust, the company we talked about first off the bat, the company which is providing the COVID vaccine passports for, at the moment, the UK, but it could possibly be the world. I just explained to you how far-reaching this company is, or at least was in 2009, right? Okay, let's learn a little bit more about the Quant family who own Entrust now. Here is a documentary called The Silence of the Quants, and it talks about their dealings in Germany during World War II. What might that be? And why haven't you heard of them? You haven't heard of them because this is in general how the mainstream press covers them. Here's Joanna Quant's obituary from 2015 in the New York Times. Joanna Brun was born in Berlin on June 21st, 1926, the daughter of an art historian. She trained as a medical assistant, but in the 1950s began working in the office of Mr. Quant, the scion of a German industrial family whose holdings included Varta, a maker of batteries. They married in 1960. Mrs. Quant was a member of the BMW Supervisory Board from 1982 to 1987, most of that time as deputy chairwoman. They talk about how nice she is and how wonderful she is, and that's how the family is generally portrayed. They skip over a whole lot of detail when they talk about the Quants. Now, here's another obituary of Joanna Quant that has a little bit more to go on. It talks about her husband, Herbert Quant, having just inherited the companies from his father, Gunther Quant, who died in 1954. The holdings of Gunther Quant included battery producer Varta, arms producer Deutsche Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken, which became Industriewerk Karlsruhe AG. They had a stake in a potash mine, Wintershall, shares in Stuttgart-based car maker Daimler, and BMW. Okay, so that's a little bit more information, and we're starting to get, a little bit more sketch. Arms manufacturing, things like that are coming up. It's still not a complete picture, though, of course. Here's the main players in this. Gunther Quant, the patriarch who built the fortune originally. Herbert Quant, his son from his first marriage and husband of Joanna. And Harold Quant, his son from his second marriage. We'll get into Harold in a few minutes, but first I want to introduce you to the patriarch and his son Herbert and what their backgrounds really were. Gunther Quant, the patriarch, began as a textile guy, and he made the uniforms for the German army during World War I. It says here he switched to the potassium industry, and that's Wintershall AG, in 1922, and he became a chairman of the supervisory board of the accumulator factory in Hagen, Westphalia in 1923. And that's the main sort of big factory, which has a lot of smaller enterprises underneath it. In 1932, Q joined the National Socialist Party, NSDAP, the Nazi Party, and was named leader of the defense economy there in 1937. And the people involved in sort of the main supporting arms of the German war machine, the German effort, they got a special title, Wehrwirtschaftsführer. Wehrwirtschaftsführer. It's a hard word to pronounce, I apologize. So these captains of industry, including Gunther Quant, were named Wehrwirtschaftsführers. And if you got this title, it meant that your company could more easily use negative employment laws for the workers and employees. Negative employment laws. What does that mean? It turns out it means that you can take advantage of slave labor. This is from the Wikipedia biography of Herbert Quant, the husband of Joanna Quant. Because Herbert Quant managed some of these factories that his father Gunther owned and operated. So it says, after extensive training at the family's companies at home and abroad, Herbert Quant became a member of the executive board of AFA, later Varta AG, and in 1940, Quant was the director of Petrix GmbH, a Berlin-based subsidiary of AFA. During the war, Herbert Quant was the director of personnel at his family factory. During his time as director, he personally oversaw an estimated death of 40 to 80 people each month through the use of slave labor, with each slave staying alive approximately 6 months. This turnover was due in large part to the concentration of acid gas in the air of the factory in which the slave labor was forced to work, mostly the battery factory. And I think that documentary I mentioned earlier, The Silence of the Quants, that mostly focuses on the Varta battery operation. And they interview people who had worked there, and they go through the whole history of it. It's really an interesting documentary. It's subtitled. I'll link to it in the description box for you. Slave labor was used extensively throughout the Quant factories, and as early as 1938. Known factories where slave labor was used included 3 factories in Hanover, Berlin, AFA's Stocken and Hagen plants, and Petrix GmbH. Concentration camps were set up on the grounds of the AFA at Hanover, which included an execution area. According to the Schultz-Sek report, there were over 50,000 slave laborers at the Quant factories during wartime. Herbert Quant was not tried after the war, though his father was interned until 1948 while he was investigated. Benjamin Ferenc, a U.S. prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, was asked about Herbert. He mentioned that Herbert kept quiet about any evidence that could have been used to prosecute him or his father. I mean, duh. Of course he did. Ferenc was convinced that if what is known about them today had been known at the end of the war, both Herbert and his father would have been prosecuted for crimes against humanity. As it was, they weren't. And they rebuilt. I don't even know how much they actually lost, to be honest. But they rebuilt, and the patriarch Gunther Quant actually became an advisor or a director